about invasive insects, and Monica McCubry is going to be our presenter today. And I'm here. I'm Allison Zock. I coordinate the Nebraska Invasive Species Program, and I'll be here today also to be answering questions and helping you out. Please type in any questions in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that, and we will address those at the end of Monica's talk. And also I'll put in the chat here a link to my website so you can learn about all the insects that Monica is going to be covering, as well as others. So type in any questions that come to your mind as we go along. And Monica, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Allison. It's kind of weird. I've been introducing you the whole week, and now I get to talk. So I'm kind of excited. Invasive species are kind of I don't want to say like I'm a nerd about them, but I think they're really fascinating. So I'm really glad we got to do this stuff this week. So today we're going to end our week, like Allison said, on insects. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for you guys. Hopefully it works. There we go. Hopefully everyone sees the big presenter, not presenter view. So
it looks perfect. Yep.
Awesome. All right. So like Allison said, today we're going to be talking about Nebraska invasive insects. So this is a huge issue as far as a group of things that are invasive, I think probably right up there, or if not even worse than plants at times. So today we're going to be talking about some different ones that we have here in Nebraska, but also some potentials that we could see and kind of the damages that they would or could cause if they were to be found in Nebraska, or if they possibly are here and we have no idea that they are. So my name is Monica McCubry. I am the Wildlife Education Specialist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. I have been here about 8 years, and so this is our first week that we've ever done Invasive Species Week. So let's go ahead and get started with insects. All right, so we have some kind of a long list of insects here, but we have ones that are known in Nebraska, and we have ones that are not known, but could be what we call potentials, or could be here. So if you look at this list, I have a couple of them starred in red. Those are ones that are kind of top priority. Please report a sighting if we see these. So not that the others aren't important, but these are ones that we are really looking for and cause huge problems that we need to know right now if they're here. So one of them I'm sure we've all heard is the emerald ash borer, or sometimes people call them EAB for short. Everything has to have an acronym, so this one does too. We also have the brown marmorated stink bug, which is the picture that you see here. I'm sure a lot of us have seen those in our houses, in our homes, especially kind of in the, sometimes in the winter, in the fall area. They're more of a nuisance pest than anything. Japanese beetle, a lot of people know about those as well. Allison's kind of mentioned those when she talked about plants this week, and some other people have mentioned those this week as well. We also have the mountain pine beetle, and then not a insect, but still important, the Asian jumping worm. So they're annelids, not quite true insects, but still kind of fall within the invertebrate category. So we'll talk about those today as well. All right, these are ones that are not known yet. Hopefully they never get here. But again, these are the ones that could be a potential for Nebraska. The starred ones, again, are ones that we really want to know if they're here. So spotted lanternfly, which is the picture that you see to the right here, kind of a pretty insect actually for an invasive species. So we'll talk a little bit more about those later. The Asian longhorn beetle kind of gets this name because of its extremely long antenna. They're very easy kind of to identify. The cereal leaf beetle, the gypsy moth, pine shoot beetle, and then a Cyrex wood wasp. So kind of just a large variety of insects that are not known, but could be potential for Nebraska. All right, so why do we care so much about invasive insects? Well, if anyone thinks, when I always think invasive insects, I always think emerald ash borer, kind of the first thing that come to mind. They wreak havoc on so many species of trees in Nebraska: ash, elm, chestnut. And Nebraska, we're a prairie state. We don't have a ton of trees like eastern United States and those forested areas, but we have quite a few, especially in our urban and developed areas. Ash trees, elm trees, like Allison talked about, the Dutch elm disease that kind of took out a lot of our elms. Now it's the ash trees' turn, and who knows what is next. There was a recent study that Purdue University did that showed that the carbon storage, the amount of that is lost due to invasive species, was kind of similar to about 5 million vehicles. So just those things alone can cause the amount of damage and destruction that these insects are having. So why do we care so much about carbon storage? Well, this is hopefully something that could combat climate change. So by the trees capturing and retaining more of that carbon from the atmosphere, that's what we want to see. So if that doesn't happen because of our invasive species, this is a problem. They also defoliate our trees. They degrade our plant diversity. They threaten the commercial forestry industry. So this is a huge problem because a lot of people have those jobs. And if there are all these invasive insects taking out our trees, we're not going to have a lot of the products that we have. We're not going to have a lot of jobs. So it's going to be a huge problem. They also hamper climate change mitigation, and sometimes they're just downright annoying. They're nuisance species, and they also can be disease vectors. All right, so one of them that we know of in Nebraska, it's a huge problem. We've heard about it for a while. It's called the emerald ash borer, so or EAB for short. So this little green insect, I hate saying that they're pretty, but they do have a really cool metallic green color. This is the adult that you see on top, and then the larva is the picture at the bottom. So the adults aren't really the problem necessarily, other than laying the eggs. They don't really do a ton. They kind of nibble on some trees and things like that. But overall, it's really the larva that we have to watch out for. So the larvae are kind of this milky white looking grub caterpillar thing. And they kind of have these triangular segments on them. So they're pretty easy to identify if you do see them. And what they do is that they will actually tear apart the trees. They eat the tissues, so the trees cannot bring up those nutrients and move water throughout their body. So that's an issue because they can't get resources, they can't get minerals, they can't get those nutrients that they need, and they eventually die. So once those larvae mature, what they will do is they will burrow out of the tree, get that borer, that's how they get their name, the ash borer, by using a D-shaped hole in the bark to escape. So if you ever look, there are some native borer insects that are fine. It's this one that's just a really big problem. They were first introduced from Asia, but they were found in Michigan in 2002, and then first confirmed in Nebraska in 2016 in Omaha, Nebraska. They have slightly moved west. I think Kearney is maybe the farthest west that we have had them right now. They spread mostly through the movement of ashwood products on vehicles, sometimes in firewood. Allison and I were talking about this earlier this week. There are some state quarantines, but they have actually been removed. The public is still encouraged not to move that firewood. They think what they're going to do instead is shift to a biological control. There's these stingless wasps that they're looking at possibly being a predator for this emerald ash borer. All right, so this is a fairly recent range map of the emerald ash borer and its kind of movement. So this was January 4th, 2021. So it's fairly recent as far as what they're moving. So if looking at this map, the blue outlined areas that you see, this is the federal quarantine boundaries. And all the little red dots you see, those are EAB detection sites. So that is where they have been confirmed. If you look at our beautiful state of Nebraska, we have quite a few in the eastern part of Nebraska, and then we have 3 little dots kind of outside that blue line. It's hard to tell because it's a little blurry, but I think Kearney is the farthest west that they have been detected so far. All right, so what are they doing to control and manage these awful insects? Well, for urban areas, people have kind of thought about periodic injections, systematic insecticides basically for their ash trees. However, this does have to be done for the life of the tree, and it has to be done proactively. So you can't say, wow, I think this is infected tree. What am I going to do? I'm going to start these treatments. It has to be done beforehand. It has to get there before there's so much loss to this tree that it's not even worth saving. And who knows if it could be saved after that. So periodic injections are pretty good. Natural areas like forested areas, one thing that they are working on, I said, is those biological controls, those stingless wasps. Also, something they say is don't plant ash trees. Like, it sounds like a very easy thing to do, but they're just looking for alternatives to ash, especially in natural areas and urban areas, since it's a good tree that a lot of people put in those developed or developing communities. They're also looking at surviving ash trees. There are a few that possibly have a resistant mechanism in them that helps them be resistant to this emerald ash borer. So there are ones that do survive. They come back and they're thinking about testing them to see if they can possibly figure out something that they're doing right so that they can control those emerald ash borers. And then there's regulatory treatments for firewood. It's kind of up to the state level at this point. Allison and I were discussing this earlier. It's pretty much what the state is willing to do. The federal people have kind of just said, well, we can't really do anything, so states take it away and manage it yourself. So it's kind of getting to a point where it's just so bad that they can't keep up, and then it's up to the state level at this point. There's various trapping techniques that could be implemented. Nothing I don't think has been super successful in that. And then I put woodpeckers in here as kind of a joke, but it is a good way to see if a tree is infested. So one of the things that woodpeckers obviously do is eat a lot of insects and larvae in dead trees. So if there's a lot of woodpeckers there, that tree could be infested. So something to kind of watch out for. All right, so again, not an insect, but still very important. The Asian jumping worm. This one I had never even heard of until about last year, about a year ago. So it looks very similar to our night crawlers or our European earthworms, which are an introduced species. They're not invasive, they are not native, but they are just introduced. So they look very similar to earthworms and these Asian jumping worms. But these Asian jumping worms, they feed on leaf litter and mulch. And then what they do is they leave the soil behind very dry and grainy, very similar to coffee grounds. So not good quality of soil. Earthworms, on the other hand, what they do is they create channels in the soil and they recycle nutrients. So they're good for our plant species, our animal species, our soil quality. Asian jumping worms do not do this. They can change the carbon nitrogen ratios. They impact the effectiveness of pesticides, and being an agricultural state, that is something that we really have to watch for. They're also believed to have been brought by accident to the US. Funny how that always happens. It's an accident usually, by plant shipments. So again, just having them be in there, plants get shipped to the US, they get into the soil, and then from there on, it's just kind of a cycle after that. And so far in Nebraska, they've been found in Douglas, Lancaster, Sarpy, and Platte counties. They're pretty easy to identify if you look, if you have the two of them side by side. So the clitellum, which is this kind of band around the earthworm here, in the Asian jumping worm, it is very milky white or kind of a gray color, and it's very smooth, and it completely surrounds the worm. Earthworms, it does not wrap around the entire worm, and it's kind of raised. It's not smooth like you see in these photos. It's very hard to tell, but it is something that you can identify them. And then they get their name Asian jumping worm because they jump, or they kind of like freak out if you ever have them in your hands. Sometimes people call them snake worms or crazy jumper worms or Alabama jumpers, but they wiggle around and they thrash around very violently if you ever hold them. All right, so what are we doing? Here's another good picture that you can definitely tell the European nightcrawler versus the jumping worm, very big differences. They mainly consist of taking precautions. So don't move stuff onto your property. A lot of us, we care about invasive species, so you're getting educated. That's what you're doing this week. So education is a huge component, being able to tell the difference. Also telling the signs that you have if you have them in your yard or if you see them in a plant, that really coffee ground, grainy, dry soil. Another thing is arrive clean, leave clean. So wash your boots, wash your the soil off of your cars. Like, it sounds like a definite pain, but it is something that could help stop or slow the spread of these jumping worms. Also, when you buy greenhouse materials, look at the plants, inspect them, make sure that they are coming from an area that's free of these jumping worms, and then also watch your compost and mulch, where you buy it and what is in it. All right, these are probably the biggest pests, I feel like, because I see them a ton. They're very similar to a June bug, but they're called Japanese beetles. Again, kind of a pretty insect. They have these iridescent colors on them, but again, a pain in the butt. They're metallic green in color, and then they're grubs that are going to be in the ground. They're kind of gray with brown heads on them. The larvae feed in the lawns, and then the adults will feed on about 300 different species of plants, everything from roses, grapes, crab apples, beans, pretty much anything. There's 300 species of them that the adults will feed on. And they don't just feed on them, they like totally wipe out the plants. If you've ever seen, they always get on my roses in the spring and the summer, and they just completely desiccate them. They look terrible. First found in New Jersey in 1916, they spread through nursery stock, and they're also good hitchhikers, so vehicles, cargo. They cause root and crop damage and defoliation of their host plants. Whoops. So what are we doing to control these guys? So there's a couple different things that you can do. This information was taken from a Nebraska extension, so this is specifically for Nebraska. So if you're in your backyard, one of the things that you could do if you have perennials or roses, something like that, you can do some topical sprays. One thing to do kind of before they start to come out, which is about June, you can take something and spray something, imidaclopridine, which can be used in May to kind of allow the distribution within the plant. So hopefully when they get on the plant and they start eating it, they don't like it and they go away. Something else that when they do come out in June, what you can do is you can do those tropical spray or topical sprays to hopefully limit the numbers of them. You can also treat the soil to control grubs. It's kind of hard to do that one just because we don't want to inject things into our soils. Some people say, well, what about traps? And sometimes, yes, they can be very effective, but they're like too good at their job. It actually makes more of them come to an area. So don't use traps. They're too good at their job. Best thing that people kind of say for their backyard management is hand picking them. Studies kind of show that if you hand pick them and put them in alcohol or just squeeze them, squish them, whatever you're doing, around 7 o'clock is the best time to do that. I don't know why, but I guess that is the best time so that they don't come back in the spring or in the next morning then. So about 7 p.m. All right, this one is kind of just a pain, the brown marmorated stink bug. They're native to Eastern Asia. They were found in Allentown, Pennsylvania in 2001, first noticed in Nebraska in 2010, and they feed and damage wide range of crops, fruit trees, ornamentals. They're basically just a nuisance pest. They migrate into your homes, sometimes in really large numbers, especially overwintering sites. A lot of people see them. We just had one in our house a couple weeks ago. It was flying around our ceiling fan. They get actually fairly large, and they don't really have a direct threat to people, but if they're disturbed or if you squish them, they just kind of release this really strong, unpleasant odor, hence the name stink bug. So what are we doing to manage these? It's pretty limited. Like we said, they're kind of just a nuisance species. They're annoying. They're not causing this huge amount of damage like the emerald ash borer. So in agricultural settings, basically chemical control is the best thing that they can do. They are pretty susceptible to several insecticides, which is good to know. Research right now is ongoing for some biological controls to see if something could possibly eat them. There is a parasitoid wasp, which has some good potential. The only problem is that they have a tendency to also eat and attack native stink bug eggs. So that's something that we would have to watch out for. If you have them in your backyards, the best thing that they tell homeowners to do is to seal off any access points where they can gain entry. I don't think this is very helpful because they can fly in when you let the dogs in, or if you open the garage door or something like that. So best you can seal your entry points, but otherwise you kind of just have to live with them at the moment. All right, so one that we do not have in Nebraska, thankfully right now, is called the spotted lanternfly, but it could be a potential. So these are actually, again, another pretty insect. They are not a moth. They kind of look like a moth, but they're not a fly either. They are actually in the same order as cicadas and aphids, leafhoppers, that kind of thing. They're native to China, India, and Vietnam. We think that they were transported to the US through product shipments. And another one, just like those Japanese beetles, they can be found on about 70 host plants. So anything from all these different like grapes and hops, that kind of stuff, they could be found on there and just decimate those plants. If they are allowed to spread in the US, they are very worried about this. It could seriously impact our grape, our orchard, our logging industries, our hardwood, our beer. For those of you that are interested, I'm going to say that again, our beer industry, our hops, this is a problem. The adults, they are going to be found on our tree of heaven, which in fact is also an invasive species. But this is where they kind of eat those things. And then they damage the host plants again by feeding on the sap from the stems, the leaves, and the trunks of the trees. All right, they cause serious damage, including the oozing sap, wilting, leaf curling. They cause a lot of dieback of trees, vines, crops, and other plants. So when they feed, they actually will secrete this really sugary substance called honeydew that encourages the growth of this black sooty mold. So basically what happens is it attacks the plant or the tree, and then the tree dies because of this mold that causes damage. It's harmless to people, but it does cause damage to those plants. So what is at risk if these lanternflies would possibly get into other places of the United States? All of these things that I have listed here: almonds, apples, apricots, cherries, pine trees, willow trees, poplar trees, all of those different things. So there's a lot of damage that could be done with these spotted lanternflies. All right, so this one was updated February 12th, so fairly recent map. This is where they currently are finding these infestations of these lanternflies, so pretty far away from Nebraska. But Allison and I were talking, and she said that there's about 93 different contracts and companies that come through Nebraska, the logging industries that will come through, that we're worried about them coming in on these products. So it's not necessarily that they're going to spread very quickly just on their own. They're going to be taken somewhere. They're hitchhikers, so they grab onto your cars. They will come in on hardwood shipments and products, plants possibly. So there's a lot of different vectors that are going to spread these insects.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
All right. Spotted lanternfly management. So what are we doing? So if they're traveling, basically this is not for us, but if you're in those areas that are infested with lanternflies, if you're traveling in and out of these quarantine zones, check your outdoor items, check your grills, your furniture, your landscaping supplies, your mowers, anything where they could grab onto. Also check for egg masses. So these will lay egg masses about 1 to 2 a year, and each of these egg masses, they kind of look like honeycombs of honeybees a little bit. They look like these big, huge egg masses. So each egg mass can have 30 to 50 eggs. So each one of these lanternflies could possibly produce up to 100 new lanternflies every single year. So it's a lot. They basically will put them on anything too. They will trees, plants, firewood, anything. So basically the huge thing is stopping their spread. Scrape their egg masses into alcohol. You can use tree traps to catch these nymphs, but again, this could have problems with native species or other species that are also on these trees. You could remove the host plants, but again, looking at those 70 different types, that's again not very realistic. You can apply insecticides, but again, that causes problems. And report sightings. That's the biggest thing that we can do in Nebraska, is to stop and slow the spread of these guys. All right, so that was all that I have for today. Anyinvasives.com has a really good view of all these species that we have talked about this week. They have report a sightings page. They have all this information and pictures of these invasive species, not just insects, but wildlife, pathogens, aquatics that we've talked about as well. All right, and so if you're interested, we appreciate everyone joining us this week. If you want more, or if you want to watch these again or share them to a friend, you can go to our Game and Parks Education YouTube channel. Every single one of these videos will be posted on there. Give us a couple hours and this one will be posted under our playlist Invasive Species. If you have been interested in this, you want to learn more, we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page, and then also our Game and Parks Commission's main page, Wildlife Education. So we have a lot of good resources out there for you if you want more, or if you want to learn more about webinars or anything like that. So please check us out on social media, on YouTube, on our website. And thanks everyone for joining us. I really appreciate everyone coming out every single day for National Invasive Species Awareness Week. Clearly everyone has a little bit of interest in our invasive species, and you're doing a great job by educating yourself on what they look like, how to identify them, what should we do. Also report those sightings. There's a couple different places. Allison's mentioned on our anyinvasives.com, you can do that. Christopher Starr yesterday talking about aquatics. The ngpc.ais@nebraska.gov is a good place to if you have questions or want an ID on something. So there's some really good resources here in Nebraska. And with that, we can go ahead and talk about questions or comments or anything. I'll stop sharing my screen here.
So Monica, one that came up in the chat is, can you talk about what the difference between introduced and invasive is?
Yeah, good question. So introduced species would be something like a pheasant. So pheasants are non-native to Nebraska. I don't know if anyone knew that, but they are non-native. They're originally from China and Asia. So they are an introduced species. They have come here and they don't really have issues, or they don't cause harm to other animals or other native species. So an invasive species then would be stuff like we've talked about all week, our silver carp, our Eurasian milfoil that we talked about yesterday, our zebra mussels, insects today. So something that does cause harm, it's non-native, it's exotic, it's causing harm is the main kind of key between introduced and invasive species.
And Monica, somebody asked for a copy of your presentation. Would you mind putting your email address in the chat for them to contact you?
Yes, absolutely.
And just a reminder, guys, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat and we'd be happy to take them from you.
Yeah, I see that Christopher put in those AIS sightings again. Thank you for doing that. I hope everyone learned a lot this week. And if you're interested in more of our webinars, we also have something called Science of, which is kind of like this, but it's a little bit more in depth. It's getting really in depth of those different nature topics. Our next one coming up is May 13th, and it's about butterflies and moths. And then we do like a 6-week series during that time as well. And then we will also do another one in the fall. So we have a lot of great resources.
One thing I'm going to plug as well is I'm going to be doing a Sunday with the scientists, which will be on the Moral Hall website. So if you want to, it's going to be a virtual event. So please join me for that. And Monica, we did have a question. With all the nooks and crannies under, how can you check for hitchhikers? What are some ways people can look for those invasive insects?
Yeah, it sounds like a really big pain looking at every single thing, but it is probably one of the best things. People that throw stuff in the back of their car, they don't think about it, but just kind of look it over. Is there any weird little brown egg sac? Is there a weird animal sticking on that? I know it's really hard to look in every single nook and cranny, and you're not probably going to find every single little insect or anything, but just looking it over really quick is a great way just to stop that spread. So even if you find 1 or 2 and there's 3 or 4 in your car, that's 1 or 2 less. There's 200 less spotted lanternflies that could possibly be in Nebraska. So again, that's kind of the best thing to do. So, and like Allison said, clean, drain, dry your boats, wash your shoes, don't take things into other countries, don't bring in hardwoods, don't move firewood. A lot of this invasive species spread can be done and almost prevented by just humans, just taking a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra effort into doing those things. So good question.
We had a question regarding those events that you mentioned, how people can get registered. Do you want to put a link or tell them where they can look for that?
You can go to our Nebraska Game and Parks outdoor calendar. So you can just go to calendar. There's a couple different ways. Calendar.outdoornebraska.gov. I think I spelled that right. Or you can just go to our Game and Parks main page and then just look for the calendar. They start May 13th. Is the next one, or if you're on Facebook, do social media, you can find that on our wildlife education Facebook page as well, under our events, and we will have everything that our division is doing as well. So yeah, great everyone, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We're glad that we could raise some awareness and educate our public on invasive species. So thank you.
In May, we're going to have probably some other events coming up, because they're going to have a National Invasive Species Week Part 2 for outreach and education. So check out my website, and Monica as well will be sending out information on what we have planned for that.
Yeah, there's going to be something good. We don't know what yet, but it's going to be good. All right. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Christopher. I think you're on. So thank you very much, guys.